Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Boundary Systems GPost for Creo NC webinar we're going to have today. We're going to be talking about the GPost product that is associated with Creo NC and used for post-processing duties for NC programs being created, obviously, by Creo NC. So we're going to take a dive into that system today and kind of talk about it, look at it, and see what it's all about. So I hope to be good and informative for everybody today with respect to the webinar as it relates to GPost. This may not be as exciting a stuff as you will inside of Creo, but hopefully we get some good value here and we keep everybody's interest and some people learn some good stuff today as far as that kind of thing goes. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We've got a few slides today. Before we actually dive in to start looking at things. Our agenda for the day will be to review and demonstrate GPost for Creo NC. Our overall agenda is we're going to have a little introduction here of both myself and the company that is Boundary Systems, with a couple slides before we dive right in, if you will. Our topic overview we're going to speak to here, what is GPost, how to access it, and then some basic using of GPost type theory. We're also going to end up and wrap up today with a Q&A session available, that we'll block off some time here at the end of the webinar that we can have some Q&A between the participants and myself. That being said, when we get to that point, I would encourage everybody to utilize the GoToMeeting question interface. In your GoToMeeting interface, you have a facilitation for typing and asking questions of myself, the presenter. And that is arguably the best method because if we start unmuting people and things, it really becomes chaotic with a lot of background noise. So I will speak and share the responses with everybody. If hopefully we get some questions at the end of the webinar, where some folks might have some follow-up questions and such and things to that effect. So rest assured there will be Q&A on that along the way. There is no problem with punching out a question as we go through the webinar. I will only speak to these questions when we get to the Q&A part of the session. If you, in fact, have a question and think of it prior to the formal Q&A time, you are obviously encouraged to go ahead and type that question in, punch it out to me at that time. It goes into a queue, and I will see it. When we get to I will see it. It will be there waiting. Your question will be there waiting for me when we get to the Q&A part of the session. So don't feel like you have to wait to that point to ask the question, but the questions will need to come in through the GoToMeeting interface to kind of keep clarity amongst all of our participants today, if you will. So that's the basic webinar agenda and theory, if you will, as far as how we're going to progress through the day. So a little bit about myself, your presenter today. I am Sean Farringer. I am a PTC technical specialist. I've been a PTC user of the PTC software product in the environment of all things NC and working with GPost since 2001. I've been a PTC certified trainer since around 2007. My apologies. My specialties or my core focus as a user trainer, if you will, are manufacturing Creo NC type stuff, large assemblies, tooling design as it relates to mold and industrial tooling and those types of things, as well as surfacing type techniques. So those are some basic background information about myself. A little bit about Boundary Systems. They are obviously a technology leader in the PTC space, if you will. They are a global company as part of the PDS Vision group of global companies now. One of the 16 fastest private growing companies in the greater Cleveland area. The overall capabilities from the company are very deep and vast. Product lifecycle management, data management, direct CAD design and consulting, simulation, and product development. Are all part of the things that are handled, as well as the obvious front-facing software type interactions to include training and and sales, if you will. Some more about boundary systems. They've been awarded by both Inc. 5000 and Weatherhead 100. Major accreditations being a PTC Platinum Partner, Windchill Certified Provider, PTC Authorized and Certified Training Partner for Creo, Windchill, MathCAD, and ArborText. Some of the software solutions and companies that Boundaries partners with to provide advancement in software for their clients are listed on the screen here. Obviously, PTC, Keyshot, Moldex 3D, Sigmaxim, eTraj, a host of software partners work with Boundary Systems to provide the ideal best solutions for clients. Okay, so here's our more slightly granular topic overview for how we're going to process through the context of looking at things of GPost.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean, I think you have your screen paused. We're still on the intro slide.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
There, it does update. My apologies, folks. Thanks, Wade.
No problem.
My apologies, folks. I'm going to back up a couple of slides here because one of my staff, my supervisor was able to detect that I didn't have the screen flowing for you guys. It was on pause, and I apologize. I hadn't really detected that yet. Let me get back to the slide we are on now. There we go. So these, again, are software partners, as I was mentioning, that Boundary Systems partners with in order to provide for best-in-case solutions for clients, if you will. So again, you can see a host of these software partners shown here on the screen. Okay, so back to topic overview now. This is how we're going to discuss the context of GPost. Again, it's arguably not as flashy, interesting in many ways as what Creo itself is, but nonetheless, we're going to look at it in Creo. We're going to show how Creo connects to it, etc. We'll talk about what GPost is. We'll talk about the two primary components that comprise the work of dealing with GPost, which would be what they refer to as the option file generator, or OFG for short, and the file interface language, which is for short as FIL, as you see here. Those are the two primary top-level things that you would interact with in the context of making a post processor. We're going to talk about how to access GPost because, unfortunately, in my travels, I encounter a lot of cases where people just aren't even familiar with how to get to the software and open it up and start working with it, if you will. So we'll talk about accessing both the OFG, the option file generator, as well as accessing and potentially working with FIL code that would be associated with a post processor. And then possibly one of the most important parts of the webinar today will be, I will show you where they buried all the documentation and important information about these two things and how to go get that stuff and start looking into it and forwarding your own knowledge about all things GPost. Then we'll have a little bit of discussion about the actual mechanics of using GPost, both the OFG and the FIL systems within GPost, and then how do we, use a post from Creo? So once we have some post, how are we going to go act on that in Creo? Lastly, we will speak to there's not many, but there's a handful of config.pro settings that are in fact relevant to the operation of GPost in the Creo environment. So we'll kind of speak to those settings a little bit as we kind of conclude with, working and walking through the kind of things that GPost is and does. On this slide here, before we begin the webinar demo, we are seeing an example on the left-hand side. See in the OFG interface, and on the right-hand side, you're seeing just a simple example of what FIL code might look like in this case. So again, the right-hand side just shows an example of FIL code. It is not intended to be production or anything to that effect, or that all of it looks that way. It's just an example of what something might look like. So we'll be speaking about both the stuff on the left and the stuff on the right to some degree during the course of the day here, or during the course of our webinar. So when we get to, and as we wrap up and we're having our Q&A session, etc., if I am not displaying something specific to the screen at that time, I will work to keep my contact information and this slide up on the screen so that folks can take a screenshot or, get the information out of there, whatever the case may be, to both contact our sales team and myself, as well as, remind you that we have a YouTube channel where this webinar will be after the recording is processed through the company. They are put up and posted to our YouTube channel. There are just a bunches and bunches of them up there now. So I encourage, irrespective of what your questions or, something you might want to know more about would be, the Boundary Systems YouTube channel is a very good place to start for anything you might look to know more about with respect to Creo. There's a great diversity of information up there, whether that information be related to GPost or surfacing or wind chill or whatever the case may be. It's just a very deep set of good information now, based on these webinars and other events. So I will make certain that this contact information is available at the end, and everybody is encouraged to both follow up with myself and the sales team if you need more information about not only GPost, but virtually anything in the PTC ecospace. Okay, so with that being said, I'll get my slide ready again here, and we'll go ahead and get started today. So the first part of talking about GPost is actually coming from looking at Creo. So in this context, in the context of Creo, is where we can go access GPost. There's a way to create a separate shortcut that you can access GPost outside of Creo. It kind of, it's a kind of little jump through the hoops thing. Anybody that wants to shoot me an email after the webinar, I'll shoot you back an instruction set and the information about how to set up that shortcut so that you can have a shortcut that starts GPost separately from launching the Creo interface. Today, we are going to be looking at launching into GPost from the Creo interface, as it is the default method that is provided to everyone by PTC. So once you're in the Creo interface and you want to take a look at something GPost, or you want to work with a post, create a new post, whatever the case may be, you would subsequently start this process by interacting with the Applications tab in Creo and selecting the GPost Postprocessor, the NC Postprocessor option we have here in the Applications tab. So we're going to go ahead and start that now and pull this up and have a look at what's in, what's presented to us by the option file generator. We are looking at this being currently driven in the context of Creo 6.0, okay? There may be slight variation to this in previous versions or future versions, but arguably, one of the very wonderful things about Austin NC and GPost is they do a very good job of keeping things consistent. They have not historically gone through a deep interface change or something to that effect, similar to PTC's transition from toolbars to ribbons and things to that effect. This interface will have a very similar look and feel in theory to it, irrespective of what version of the software you might be using. So with that being said, let's have a look at a little bit of how this process goes. If we were going to go make a new post, how would that look? So when you've opened up the option file generator here, this is the place where you create a new post. You can make some edits to existing posts, as we'll see as we go through this process, operations of that effect. We'll learn about what FIL does and is for the system as we progress farther. But in the beginning, you would theoretically, if you're starting from zero or potentially editing a pre-existing post, it is very likely you would start here inside of the option file generator. We're just going to click new today, okay? So when you click file new here in the option file generator, you end up being presented with the types of machines that PTC can, not PTC, but GPost can support as a post-processor system. All forms of lathe, all forms of mill, to include mill turn, your multitasking high-end, multi-turret, multi-spindle, lathe-based machines nowadays, wire EDM, both in 2 and 4 axis, lasers and punches, okay? And of course, you know, mill is a 2-through axis type thing. We don't specify in the beginning how many axes the machine has. We worry about that later in the settings. We're just generically declaring what type of machine we're going to be working with here. So we go ahead and we say mill and we say next. Now, once we go ahead and we do that, in this case, it's asking me to define the option file location. And you see that it's getting ready to put it in a specific folder here, D, 2PTC, post, blah, 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 names and numbers. We're going to speak to that more towards the end of this session where we talk about the config.pros relationship to GPost. This sets the place where these things happen. I am seeing this option file name with its predefined path because of specific settings I have active inside of Creo, okay? So be aware of that. This isn't all smoke and mirrors. We're going to talk about how these things happen in this automatic way as we progress forward, but I'm not going to derail into that vector right now. So in this case, it's saying, hey, my next number or the number it's going to give me is P04. Posts always have a number designation in the system. They can have names and they can be associated with things like Mazak mill and Haas mill, etc. And that's fine. And we can see those names when we use the post processor. But internally to the system, these things all get a 2-digit, you know, if you will, numbered extension on the end of them to designate that. Now, in that context, if we were to go look at that, this is what that looks like in a GPost folder. So in a GPost folder, we are just looking at the load point installation now on my computer. We see we have UNCX01, F26, and F43, etc. Those are, in fact, different post numbers as being viewed in that folder, okay? So in my post folder, I could go look in here and organize these things by name and make an attempt to see, no, I don't have a number 4 there already. So the number 4 is okay to be used in this case as far as our next post number. You obviously don't want to be using a number here that might have already been claimed or used in some way. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let this be with number 4 today, and we're going to go ahead and say next. Now, it comes up with 3 options for how you want to get started. Do you want to use post-processor defaults? Do you want to use the system-supplied default option file? Or would you like to copy an existing option file, a pre-existing post, to be the basis for this one? That can be very handy if you're looking to duplicate something with limited variation in the context of a GPost creation workflow, okay? Today, we're going to use a system-supplied default option file because we're not getting, you know, terribly involved, and we're not going to go copy off another post because then that doesn't really speak to much here, okay? So we go ahead and we say next because we're copying the default option file. Now it wants the location and the name of my standard template here that we might otherwise use. And now they're giving me some information, you know, some basic control stuff. What are we dealing with here as far as different types of controls and things to that effect? These are library controls, et cetera, that you could subsequently use and pull up as a basis for getting started, if you will, in terms of your post processor. There's quite a few of them there. We're just going to take a Haas control today, okay? So we go ahead and we say next, and it comes up, it says this is going to be a Haas control, and I'm going to call it Haas Control Webinar today. So that's the name that I'll see. That's the name that I would subsequently access this post with, and it would be accessed by number 4. Okay? So we go ahead and we say finish. Now at this point, I am launched into the basic default environment for dealing with structuring out a post processor in the option file generator. Now, a couple of things to note. I don't encourage this to be a place for people that do not have intimate shop floor, machine side knowledge and understanding. And what that means is I'm not out to throw a bunch of programmers under the bus, but there's a lot of programmers that have been protected from shop floor people in terms of intimately knowing G code and M code, if you will, that the machine is actually going to require. That the rules of what must happen in the context of creating a post processor, and this is no different as GPost or any system, those rules are defined by your machine tool. The programming manual for that machine tool, the G&M code manual, and its day-to-day operators are immensely invaluable in the context of being able to create a post processor that works for your client, which is that day-to-day operator, as well as something that the machine responds to correctly. Day-to-day operators may know things like, hey, we prefer and we have better results on the machine when the post is outputting IJK as opposed to the post outputting an R value when we're speaking about a GO2 or a GO3 ARC command being output by the post processor. So those are things to keep in mind. So, always know that you can benefit notably from that shop floor information. And if you find yourself here and some of these things don't make sense, a lot of times those folks understand intimately a lot of the stuff that this post processor is presenting, even though they don't sit and drive Creo necessarily and make programs all day, every day. Some people do set up and program in Creo, set up on the machine, run it on the machine. They do the entire chain of manufacturing that way. In many cases, we have clients where there's a programming group and then there's a shop floor that runs it. And those people can share and benefit each other immensely in the context of creating a post processor. You land on the machine tool type page. Things are organized into panels and groups on the left-hand side of the OFG interface that you are currently looking at. There's machine tool type, file formats, start and end of program, motion, machine codes, operator messages, and advanced. We'll be taking at least a minimum cursory look at all of these different things as we walk through making some changes to this post processor. On the type and specs tab, you have basic things that's controlling the number of accesses of the machine and where home position of the machine might be. If we need to do limit checking on that machine, how is that going to happen? Those types of things. Transforms and outputs handles the basics of the way the NCL code interpretation is being transposed for the actual output code. In 99% of cases, most users will not be interacting with these pages. Very advanced, most often multi-axis, complicated multi-axis environments are where things like transforms and output, planar machining, and right angle head that follow here would be interacted with. 5-axis mill, 6-axis and greater lathe, if you will. Those types of things can get notably more involving, and transforms may become a part of that. File formats. File formats controls the stuff of word relationships. So when we start talking about what the machine expects for different things, so if anybody, and hopefully we at least have participants that are somewhat familiar with FANUC-based code, as there seems to be just so much of it out there, at the end of the day, Haas and FANUC have a lot of similarity with very little variation. When we start looking at this, we see that we're saying in this case that from a word mapping standpoint, if you will, our G code address is H for the tool length comp. And of course, in most typical FANUC-based environments, that would be the case. The word being associated with the number is the H value. The prep code that is G43, which is most typically output for this, we handle that in a different place. That's not the word. It's like we're talking about what things connect with. The same being said, if we get down here to the S word, well, what is that? That's going to be your Spindle command. This is where you make those associations. If you click selected edit selected address, you get the governance of things like decimal point output control and things to that effect for that particular statement value. So when we're outputting spindles, we see here that in this case, we're going to put out 4 values before a decimal place, 4 values after a decimal place. We would output trailing zeros, but we are not outputting the decimal point. So that, it's kind of like not effectual for trailing zeros in this case. Arguably, in most cases nowadays, you ought to bump that up to 5 digits unless your machine doesn't support that. It's getting to be more and more typical that we're exceeding 10,000 RPM spindle availability on most machines. So in that case, we would need to subsequently bump up both of these values to be before decimal to 5 on both sides, or we would not be able to program spindle speeds and output them greater than 9999 would be the cutoff at 4 digits for the spindle speed. So we would have to bump this up to be compatible with a typical modern machine having more than 10K RPM available to it. So that's where you control the configuration of the word and what the heck that word is connected to in a GPost context, if you will. All right, we have a list file, and the list file is a part of how it is typically advocated to do debugging and to do, troubleshooting, for lack of a better description, with respect to your output code. The list file is a file that GPost creates when post-processing happens that has the errors in it, and it has the information that GPost was reading, what GPost was writing, and again, as I said, any errors that were created during that process. That stuff is in the list file. How you configure your list file and how you want it to look is handled on this page. The rest of this stuff is the stuff of sequence numbers and, some simulation file and HTML packager. Those are some pretty specific case conditions that apply to very few people doing post operations. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those things today. But the concept of handling your MCD file, your list file, and your sequence numbers, yeah, those are pretty boilerplate things. Everybody's going to be doing that, likely. Start and end of program allows you to configure a host of different stuff about how you want the start of the program to look and how you want the end of the program to look, okay? And whether or not you want rewind codes to be output, whether you're going to output a timestamp, etc., all of these different things apply. Specific codes and characters for things like end of block and different stuff like that are handled on the codes and characters tab. Most of this stuff comes out of the box working in a way that is compatible for the vast majority of post creation. A glaring exception to this that comes to mind is everything in the Hind space, and arguably most everything in the Siemens space as well are very demanding machines to deal with as a post-processor because they have a lot of things that are very different from what we would say is baseline typical FANUC. They are very unique machines, and a lot of these things must be set uniquely to accommodate that. The default prep codes that we would be outputting for the startup of a post, they can be listed here. Usually we don't handle it this way, but you can. The post measuring units have to be declared. So what is the input going to be? It's going to be same as the NCL units. And what is the output going to be? Same as the NCL units. But the option file, when you type numbers into the option file is looked at as being English units or metric units. And you have to tell me what you want to do here, okay? If you're going to be typing numbers in here in this option file as you declare things like clearance planes, etc., whatever, that stuff might, in fact, have to be declared by a unit type so that it can be properly transposed and used when the units change. So this becomes an important setting here with respect to default prep codes. You can elect to output specific start of program and end of program goes. You could subsequently punch out a comment. And now that comment, would be inserted at the start of program automatically every time the post processor is subsequently used. So you can add this information to the start of the program, and you can arguably, if you go back to the General tab, you can arguably say output user-defined end of program blocks here, and then subsequently you get an end of program tab as well, where you could also output lines there. It's worth noting these lines are output as is, where is. What you see is what you get. So if you need to have this, or you wish to have something you're putting in here output as, in fact, a comment, you do, in fact, have to comment that here yourself. I could just as easily output something on this order. I could say G0, G90, X0, Y, come on, Y0, and Z100. Could just as easily be outputting a line like that at the end of program. The lines are going to be inserted explicitly as they are declared here. If you want GPost to prompt you and handle, managing program number and stuff, that's all here on this page. You can come here and configure how you want to be prompted for your program number. On the Motion tab, there are basic controls, and then there are more advanced controls in some of the subpanels. There's general motion control. Do you want to output the repeat point? Do you want to do it only during multax, etc.? Linear control. What is the linear interpretation code? It's known that prep codes are going to come out with a G, because we declared that back under file formats, but what is feed rate? Well, that's a G1. Is this prep code modal? Yes, no. It's just a checkbox. Okay? So how are rapid moves going to be handled? And then also we have motion analysis, which is very beneficial to people because it determines the sequence under which the axes act during both approach and retract from the work. Typically, in mill, speaking to 3-axis, if you will, minus certain specific machine conditions that dictate otherwise, most folks do an XY spindle move, and then they follow that with a Z move, turning on the tool length offset and activating the coolant. That sequence of 2 moves is, at least in my experience going back quite a while now, pretty typical in the way people wish to approach the part in a 3-axis mill. In this case, you would be saying something like, in this case, XY, rotary, then Z, and then coming out, you are Z, then XY, then rotary. So these types of settings would be applicable to you as far as that goes. Or in a case where if you have to move all 3 axes at the same time, as some machines actually do dictate that they do need a 3-axis move to effectively deploy a diameter comp, a length comp, and positional work offset at the same time, get that all activated. In those cases, you would say none, just XYZ rotary. Away we go. So that's kind of how you control those types of things. The circular definition here, this is where we're controlling the GO2, GO3 outputs that the post will make for the machine tool. Cycles tab controls things like your hole-making cycles. In a FANUC comparison, these are things like G81, G83, G85. Heideheim does it very differently, as do other systems. But in a typical sense, it's your G80-something cycles that you're using to do basic hole making and drilling and those types of things. Okay, so that's where you're going to configure cycles, is on this page, and you'll handle that. There are Unigraphics specific setups, and there are Siemens 840 specific setups available as well, as again, those things have very unique requirements. Curve fitting is not something most people are typically doing, at least not at the post-processor level, in terms of, doing fitting in order to reduce size and things to that effect and facilitate faster machining, reduce program size, etc. Those types of workflows can be done by the post-processor, but I would argue it's fairly atypical. Most often, those optimizations are happening on the software side prior to posting. All right, so machine codes. Here we're talking about things like prep codes. Now, if we were talking about the hole making cycles, for instance, as we see here, cycle G codes for cycle drill, this machine is configured to currently use 81. If I were to click in that field, I could just come down here and pick a new number and set it to 99 if this machine had a specific requirement for that to be 99. But the benefit of this is if you remember, we picked that control default thing and we said Haas in the beginning. It goes through and it fills in quite a bit of this stuff for you. So you have less of that to check to the shop floor on the actual machine. You don't get a free pass with that. The machine is the final answer. The machine may have updates, it may have options, it may have variants that was not associated or known to the GPost defaults. There's no expectation that these things work turnkey out of the box without review of all this stuff and making sure that it is in fact aligned with the machine that it is going to be deployed to. So this is where you would set up your basic codes for some of those things. We also have the same context for things like M codes, things like feed rates. What are the inch per minute? You know, in this case, inch per minute mode or millimeters per minute is going to be designated by 94. Inches per rev is not available by default, but it is most typically a G95 code when it is. So that's how you would subsequently do that. And if you wanted to set your minimum and maximums here for something like that, you would subsequently do that down here. You know, what any multiplier or anything to that effect that was necessary. Inverse time is typically used in 5-axis exclusively in order to calculate moves based on time as opposed to based on linear feed rates in order to prevent overspeed conditions on rotary moves that are occurring in 5-axis. So it's kind of atypical. It's not something everybody runs into at the end of the day. So there's also fixture offsets. You know, here's your FANUC style fixture offsets. What's the minimum? What's the maximum? What's the default, etc. Those types of things. The offset address can also be set over here. Okay. So we also have tool change sequence. Here's that tool length prep code I mentioned when I said, yes, it's going to be G43 output with that Z move. Well, that falls over here on this page. And it's got an auxiliary code of 6, which means the T number auxiliary code being M codes, M6, is how that line gets put together in the context of this post. And then we would set things like, hey, is the T code modal? Does it need to be output on separate lines? Do we want to ignore tool length offsetting by Creo and use the tool length exclusively on the machine? This has to do with gauge length programming and things like that as it relates to 5-axis pretty exclusively. Output next tool pre-select. Output the tool number as length when not specified, etc. This is where we're going to go ahead and set these types of things up. You can also output your own specific user blocks with tool changes. So the tool changes can have things like reminders and MO1 being output near the tool change, things to that effect. So you've got a lot of control over tool change now. How you manage the spindle is shown here. You know, your spindle codes, your Haas, you know, for this Haas in question, how many spindle ranges do we have? The aux codes or the M codes, as you might refer to them, either or. What are the applicable codes driving the spindle? What are the direct RPM speeds? In this case, they're capping this thing out at 999, or 9,999 RPM. If we needed to change that, and again, like we did, we added another digit to the output for the spindle word, so theoretically your maximum speed could become that numerically, but it's very likely it's a lot closer to something else, like maybe 13,000 RPM or something, absent accelerated spindle rotate, spindle RPMs and things to that effect. So we might set that accordingly. Dwell parameters for how different cycle dwell and input dwell conditions are handled here on this page. Operator messages. Operator messages now is the stuff of punching out things like pprint. from Creo and stuff to that effect. Maybe you want to output the sequence name from Creo. Well, that's an available piece of information that can be punched into the output code. It's considered to be an operator message, and the expectation for the machine in terms of how that's output is managed on this page. The last tab that says Advanced gives you a way to interact with commons variables locations. We'll have a brief discussion about that here in a minute. And it also gives you the ability to have your own to-do list stuff, to search different things inside of the variable listing, etc. And you also get an FIL editor here embedded in this interface that you can subsequently use to make changes to the FIL code. We're going to start looking at FIL code in a standard text editor because this text is going to be really small for some viewers, and talking about it and speaking to it in the FIL editor specifically would arguably be a little less elegant right now. So I'm going to use Notepad++ to show and talk about FIL stuff today. But you do get an FIL editor embedded right to the OFG interface, from the folks at GPost. So you can utilize this as your editor, and it is code created that it does color things and do stuff to that effect to make it a little bit easier to work with the textual part if you're doing that of a post processor. Now, that kind of covers the basics of what the OFG is and, different things that you set in it. Now, in the context of creating a new post, you would go through and you would set and debug all of these things, and you would make sure that it's outputting what you expect from just these settings. But you might get to a place where you have a very advanced control, or you have specific requirements about how you wish to output something. What you don't have a lot of control of in the OFG are things like the order of output. So a lot of times people say, I want the T command to come out, and then after that, I want a fixture offset, and then the spindle, and blah, 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 blah. We have a defined order that we expect our post processor to operate in. Well, the thing is that the post is running on a file that is called an NCL file. So at the end of the day, what this essentially is if I go find an NCL file of my own here, bear with me for just a second while I go do that. Let me see, there's got to be something in here. There's got to be a mill demo. Yes, here's an NCL file. So I'm just going to go open this up with Notepad++ today. All right, so I'm going to turn this on to my NCL editor viewing so that we can kind of see this. This is the intermediate file that is your red lines on the screen in Creo NC when you get done creating code, or creating cuts, if you will. Excuse me. PTC writes this file and sends it off to the post processor. It's called the .ncl file, and those that are familiar with posting may be familiar with this file. Part of the issue that presents itself in the creation of a post processor is that you get the order of this file. So when we're looking at the order that things are going to happen, we see here is the load tool statement that I have highlighted right now. This set statement that follows below it is the statement that would punch out your work offset. And then the statement we see down here that says SPINDL, that would be your subsequent spindle statement that punches out the spindle RPM. Okay? Now, if I didn't want those things to occur in that order, and it is subsequently important enough for me to get down in there and change that, the way we handle those types of higher level operations of reordering the output of a post processor or something to that effect, that is handled by this FIL that I keep speaking to. Now, what is FIL and how do we access it? Now, we have seen the FIL editor here that we are looking at where I have subsequently shown this FIL, I'm going to go ahead and save this post. And we know up here it's in this 2PTC post folder. It's UNCX01 PO4. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that folder now. And we're going to have a look at what that file actually is. So I'm going to go here in my post folder. I'm going to reorder it by date. And there's a file, UNCX01 F04. We're going to go ahead and edit that with Notepad++. I'm going to turn on my little GPost coloring for Notepad++, so it's at least a little bit like the editor was inside of the option file generator. That's accessing the same stuff. Whether you prefer to work on FIL code inside of something like Notepad++, or you would prefer to work on it inside of the option file generator interface, no harm, no foul. It's all the same stuff. It's in all the same place. Now, this is where we would go write code that will do different things, higher level things, like change the order of post-processor output, okay? And it would be put into the file, something like the file you see here. And we see that they gave us the default mil file created by the OFG. That's what we asked for when we started the beginning of this post. And because it's a default file, it just comes with some basic headers, and that's it. There are no sim file sections here. There are no macros declared. This is an empty post that you would have to put your own FIL code into in terms of using the FIL language to make changes to that post-processor output. I don't like to present webinars as typing classes, so I'm going to open up something that has a whole bunch of predefined stuff in it to talk about that rather than sit here and type it out in front of everybody today. So this would be where we would start to get to a place that looks a lot more like, if I can close that, I'll bring in the other file here. We're going to go get a predefined F file that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that on to be GPost, and we'll kind of scroll down here a bit. So in this case, we'll just go look at something like what was used in this case to do, if I remember right, this will have everything almost has a tool change. So we'll go look at load tool here, and we see here's some information, or here's some text that is the context of writing FIL language. And this would be the type of information you would start typing in to act on the post processor. You would not type in what you see here verbatim. This was typed in order to perform certain operations that needed to occur for the post processor in question. This is the type of stuff that is the FIL language that expands the capability of GPost infinitely. No matter what it is that you want to do with the post output, you can get there using the FIL language interface to GPost. If the default output that you acquire from the OFG is not to your specification, you will be able to use FIL in order to get to your specification. Now, I know what this looks like. This looks like alphabet soup. And there's just these little bitty examples on the screen today, and this has no tangible value. I get that. And that's why one of the most important things I wish to share with everybody today is how the heck do I go figure out more stuff about this? I mean, Sean's not going to be able to explain what all this alphabet soup looks like today in a meaningful way that's going to take anybody anywhere in the long side with GPost or FIL. The thing is, unfortunately, they do a pretty good job of hiding the documentation that you're looking for. So where that gets put is in your GPost folder. So if hopefully everybody can see it, because I can't really, I'll copy paste it into Notepad here if you give me a second, and then I can increase the size of this text so everybody can hopefully read it in a good way. But basically, this is my load point on the computer, okay? This is where I have Creo installed. Hopefully, this folder looks familiar to everybody, or you can go find it on your own system. The part I have gray highlighted on the end now, screenshots are encouraged at this time, by the way. The part I have highlighted at the end of that is going to be common on pretty much everybody's system if your CAD admin group or you did a standard install, okay? This is where you're going to go find the documentation that isn't obvious on the face of it. Inside of that folder is going to be the GPost default files that we just use to build stuff, and the two most important pieces of information that you're really looking for here. I encourage the reading of the release notes in GPost after every update if you use this stuff, because they do change things. And it's typical that they are very good, like PTC, at retaining reverse legacy compatibility. There are times when they do have to change things to fix a bug or something or whatever that may in fact impact your historical code. In order to be sure that is or is not happening, it behooves you to read the release notes prior to just running the post in a new version, because they do change things from time to time. In my 20-some years, it happens enormously infrequently that it actually affects existing written posts, but it is possible. So the release notes have an enormous value for that reason. There's both a manual for the GPost manual. The GPost manual covers two very important things. I'm going to open it up now and give a little quick preface to it. The GPost manual covers two very important things. And I'm not really going to be able to show it, but it covers the OFG and it covers the word list. And what I mean by that is if we come in here and we do a search, and we're just going to search for one of those words that was output by PTC in that NCL file, right? So we're just going to go find cycle. So here we see, yep, there's cycle. And that starts on 419, and you've got cycle on, you've got cycle off, and you can simply search through if you wish, to find whatever you want. The stuff of the OFG, as we can see, I'm just scrolling down to get a few pictures up here. You can see the pictures of the different stuff on the OFG. They cover both that, and if you search down, you'll get to the word cycle, and then they're going to explain how these cycles work in both context of lathe and context of mill and as applicable. So the GPost manual is important because it talks about the OFG and it explains the breakdown of words that are used by the post processor. So I'll close that guy real quick, and we're going to go ahead and open the FIL manual now. Now, the FIL manual is the stuff of what the heck, how do I get to the place where I understood that alphabet soup example that Sean just put on the screen? That's all covered in this document. These are notable. The other document was 400 and some pages. This document is 278 pages. The documentation provided by GPost is extensive, and it does cover all of these things that look like alphabet soup and how to do different functions. If I need to output a string and I have to output the words my string in it, how do I do that? That's all going to be explained here intimately in how to do those things inside of FIL. The language is powerful because it enables you to do anything you want in line with an active post processor. I tell everybody that's kind of like Swiss Army knife stuff, right? You can save yourself with it and cut your fingers off all at the same time. So note that FIL works a little bit like that. These things should be approached with a tedious, scientific method, for lack of a better description, in terms of both creation, troubleshooting, and management of a post processor. Your very expensive machine tool on the floor is hinged on that. Clearly, bad things in a post can cause enormously expensive results on the shop floor. So be aware of that. That's where the documentation lives. Again, for anybody that might have missed it, I'm going to put this back up. I'm encouraging screenshots right now. You're looking on your own system for the stuff that is highlighted in gray. The previous part of what's in gray may or may not be consistent both on your system and mine. But the end of that, common files, x86e, blah, 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 GPost, you should be able to find that folder on your system. The documentation should reside there, okay? So that at least gets us to the point where, you know, we have some documentation, but this is what that FIL language looks like. It's very much the stuff of, you know, similarities to, if anybody has familiarity with writing other high-level languages, whether that be Visual Basic or C or .NET or, you know, you'll do really well if you have Fortran experience. GPost has a loose similarity at minimum to the theory of Fortran, if you will. So these types of things are beneficial. It is the context of writing language logic programming. If outseek, which is a variable, as you can see here, it was declared somewhere else. It's not shown here. But if this value is equal to 99, then I want to insert this line. And if not, then just don't do it and go down here and start processing this other stuff. So it's very typical when you get into very advanced requirements for a postprocessor. This is what that stuff might look like. And you would use FIL to get there for things like reordering output, you know, creating and customizing custom information, things to that effect. What does some of that actually look like from an outputting standpoint, and how does this relate to using GPost in Creo and config.pro and stuff like that, as I mentioned? So we're going to go ahead and put away Notepad++ for a minute here and kind of put away all these things. And we're going to get back here to Creo. Well, I got to close the option file generator, excuse me. So we're going to close that. All right. So now we're back to Creo, and we've got a simple NC program example online here already. And I got a map key that does my post-processor stuff. So we're going to watch posting something and selecting a post out of Creo and kind of show some of what's possible with your post-processor. So I'm going to go pick a predefined post here and just output the stuff. Now you see in this case, Creo actually loaded my posted program to the screen as part of post-processing. This is some of the cool stuff you can bring to bear with FIL code, the kind of thing of telling Creo to, hey, output this code and then, you know, put it on the screen in front of me, so I don't have to go browse and open that file and do all that kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff that FIL can bring to bear. Creating and outputting your own tool lists to the program. Handling extensive commenting and things to that effect. This is an example of a hide-behind control, and they are arguably some of the most notoriously demanding stuff out there. So you can handle, you know, this is an example of a can cycle line for a hide-behind, if you will, and you can subsequently, you know, utilize the extensive capabilities of GPost to output very complicated information like this as your cycle line, as opposed to the typical G81, you know, X, Y, Z, R feed rate, if you will. So it doesn't matter how intimate this code needs to be for output, FIL can get you there. You can utilize the extensive, amazing powers of the FIL language to extensively alter and manipulate the GPost output to your liking. If the OFG does not provide you something that is acceptable, the OFG will typically provide a working post that does not do anything stupid like crash or other things. You have the, you know, the motion analysis and the X, Y, then Z, and some of those controls that I mentioned in the OFG. But you're not going to get to a place where you're outputting a cool tool list and you're going to handle this hide-behind can cycle and stuff to that effect utilizing the OFG. That would require the deployment of FIL to bring those things to bear. And, you know, as I showed, you would go in and start writing sections of that FIL code in order to change this output on the fly. That context of actually writing that code and doing that in the course of this webinar, not optimal at the end of the day, but we at least got you to where the documentations are and things like that, so we don't have to have the most boring webinar in the history of Earth where Sean just sat here and typed a bunch of stuff. So that's using a post. I had a list come up, and I need to show one more thing here. I'm going to post it the old-fashioned way. So we're going to go save, we're going to go save a CL file. Okay, we're going to save it for the op1. We're going to output that to a file, and we're going to say done. So there's my op1 NCL file. It's going to be output. I'm going to say okay, and done. Now it just made, if I look down here, it tells me, hey, I just went and made that NCL file that Sean was talking about. It's going to be version 7, and it's been done successfully. So now I say post a file, and I go grab that NCL file in question, and I say open. I want to make sure I check machine in this case, and I subsequently say, whoops, and I say done. And now I've subsequently output that code. So it doesn't do all the cool stuff that, the map key does, but the code's been output now, and I can go find that file, and I can go utilize it. Now, that being said, I had mentioned that we would have some context discussion about GPost and config.pro. And this is important because we have to speak to the context of configuration options that are important for GPost. So these are some settings, if I may, here, bear with me. I had this in some notes. Let me bring that back. There we go. Okay, so I'll make these big here so we can kind of see them. We'll zoom this up. There we go. All right, so these five settings here are important to your postprocessor. This sets the directory where GPost is going to go look for those posts. Remember how when we started this whole thing today, it started up and it had a folder of its own. It wasn't defaulting into the load point. That was happening because my settings are of this directory. And if you remember, this is the directory that it was subsequently pointing to. The Pro MF tape directory. If you use that, that's where your output files go. The .nc file, the whatever extension you give it file, that's where you're saying you want those to go. If you don't want that all in a specific folder and you don't declare this, they end up in your working directory or in your workspace, respectfully, if you are in Windchill. The same for the Pro MFCL directory. Where do you want those NCL files to be deposited? If you don't want them all in a specific place and you don't enforce or declare this particular setting, then they will be in the working directory and, again, respectfully, the workspace, if in the case of Windchill, okay? The MFG XYZ number of digits and the IJK number of digits. IJK, to be clear, is not talking about IJK as it relates to GO2, GO3 command theory. This is IJK as it relates to a multax go-to statement which presents the vector information to GPost in order to determine the rotary axis angle that is applicable for the move in question. So there can be problems with excessive vector precision. There can be problems with excessive precision just on standard XYZ positioning if it's used. I encourage people as a general rule, this was just copy-paste example, but if you came to me and said, what should those things be, Sean, for most typical English unit operations, I would tell you these settings as follows. I would use 5/7. It's what I do in my own work. If I were doing metric units, it would be 4/7. You can drop a decimal place on XYZ for metric. But you want to be one greater than whatever precision you tend to be outputting. Some machines, especially a lot of high-speed stuff nowadays, will actually roll with a 5-place number. If you're dealing with posting to a machine like that, then this should be 6. The precision needs to exceed the precision that you're outputting to the machine. The NCL file should be more precise than that. If you start using excessively high numbers with XYZ and you are dealing with 5-axis and you are really doing 5-axis, I'm not talking about 3+2. I'm talking about the real interpolation of 5-axis. If you're actually doing that stuff, you can really get up on the problems of vector wiggle the higher this number gets. The higher that number gets, the more likely you're going to encounter problems with what we refer to as vector wiggle, which unfortunately exceeds what I would explain today, but those that know what I mean know what I'm talking about, and that's a part of how we handle that. If you can give GPost too much vector precision. So those controls are very relevant to the inputs that GPost is working with, and subsequently how it acts based on those inputs. So that covers kind of some GPost stuff in a cradle to grave kind of way. I'm going to keep this open here again while we talk in case I have to flash that up on the screen. We're going to go back and get my contact information as promised to put on the screen here, and we're going to open the session up now for full Q&A. We do have a question come in. So let me speak to this. So does GPost support dynamic work offsets for Haas 5-axis machine? Why doesn't PTC supply post processors? We work with Autodesk and Work NC, and they supplied us with all post processors for all of our machines. Well, I'll be a little candid here today. In the NC space, Autodesk and frankly Work NC don't have anywhere near the footprint that PTC does, and they also don't have the diversity of PTC's inputs to that work. The post processors in different places handle things very differently. As an example, there are restrictions that would appear absolutely just crazy to people outside of the DoD space that are required by people in the DoD space because of the type of materials that they actually machine. They have limitations, and they have things in the post processor that just arguably are not anything like anybody else. A lot of PTC's clients are defense. They really are, and a lot of them use NC for machining. PTC has always had a very good theory of, we're going to give you the most powerful product we possibly can. We're going to give you as much customization as possible, and you go decide how that looks and how that fits in your environment. There is a PTC post-processor library. Bear with me here for just a second, and I will pull up some of that information. It's not extensively potentially as deep or less than, more than potentially what somebody else has as far as that goes, but they do have a library of stuff you can get started with. They don't make any expectations that it is suitable for a particular environment at the end of the day. They just don't decide that that stuff is going to be workable for client A or client B, but they do provide some stuff to get started with. So give me a second here, and I'm going to bring up an example of that. So like here is a list of post-processor files that are available to start with from PTC that you can go get from the web. This is mill-based stuff or mill-turn-based stuff that we're currently looking at right now. If anybody is unfamiliar with how to access this information from the web, it can be found by searching the PTC knowledge base. If you get jammed up on that, don't hesitate to shoot me out an email, and I'll subsequently go ahead and make sure that you get a link or something to this list of free post stuff that's out there as far as that deal goes. Now, with respect to dynamic work offsets, as it relates to the first part of that question, I'm going to put my contact information back up here again. When we're speaking to dynamic work offsets, I'm not exactly certain what the question asker meant, but in the context of, this is our fixture offset register parameter inside of Creo NC. This would be subsequently where we would be handling the inputs to fixture offsets. Now, when the question was presented, they meant things like, how do I output G54P1 or G54.2 or something like that, where I have a primary and an extended offset? If that's exactly what we're talking about, that's the kind of stuff we handle from FIL. When Boundary Systems handles that as an input to a client for a post, and the client says, hey, we have to do dynamic offsets, and I want to be able to use G59.6. Well, what we do is make this easy. We just let you enter 596 and we handle that on FIL and transpose that to output the proper code. You are obviously able to do the very same thing and handle dynamic offsets in that way yourself to handle whatever outputs you want. The thing is, a lot of people get hung up on typing in all this extended stuff here. That's not where it goes. You get to put in whole integers in the fixture offset register. You get to handle whatever you want to do with that integer in FIL. And this is how we do it. That's how extended or decimal offsets and those types of things are done. We just extend the number. You don't type in G59.6. You don't type in G anything. You just type in 596. We see a 3-digit offset. We take care of it. If you type in G54, it's a 2-digit offset, and there's no need to modify it. Everything works as expected. If that's not what we were talking about with dynamic offsets, I apologize. Don't hesitate to follow up with me on an email if it exceeds that kind of complexity, and I'll do what I can to speak to, the additional part of that question as far as that deal goes. Okay, so do I have an example of sequence reordering via FIL that I could? Oh, I can't. I got to expand this here. The go-to's not letting me read the whole question here. Give me just a second. Okay. FIL code that I could share. No, I am not permitted to share our direct FIL code examples to clients. We console by education. Boundary Systems offers a GPost training class as well as the product of turnkey post processors, and we do answer specific questions related to the post processor. We do not, absent the purchase of a post processor or some form of training environment or something to that effect, provide code examples in any way. Can I give an example of a post-F function? Sure, we can take a look at an example of a post-F function, but subsequently it's not something, again, that we would, share as an example or anything to that effect. So let's just go look at a post-F line. So in this case, what we're looking at here in this example is we're saying, hey, if this variable equals 99, then I'm going to do this post-F thing. Well, what is post-F? Well, if you go into the GPost documentation, you'll learn that post-F is the stuff of reading and writing inside of GPost. You might be reading and writing an information storage location, or you might be reading and writing to an external file that isn't even the file you're outputting. When we output, we write an external file of the tool list at the same time we put the tool list inside of the NC code, so somebody can open up and print the tool list separately than dealing with extracting it out of the NC file. So post-F stuff does a host of different read-write-based operations. In this case, what it's saying is, hey, post-F2 means we're going to go set a location. The number 1 here is indicating that it's going to be an INTCOM location. And that location that I wish to set is 1860, and the value I'm going to put in there is a 3. And then I'm going to insert this line. And then I'm going to set that very same thing back to a 0. Because we got to do some hocus pocus with syncus numbering to accommodate our buddies over there at Hi-to-Honey. So there's got to be a little bit of jumping around with sequence numbers. That's an example of what's going on here with respect to this post-F. Okay? So next up on the menu, can we make a shortcut to access GPost without starting Creo? Yes. And all you have to do is follow up to me with an email. And again, I'll bring up this deal here for screenshots. But essentially, I have a Creo shortcut here in my little shortcuts folder that says GPost. And I can go launch off of this shortcut. And now I've got the option file generator up in front of me without having to drill in through Creo. This is hugely beneficial because then I can be making changes to the post while I'm posting it out of Creo and subsequently testing it. It kind of locks Creo back and forth when you launch this application from Creo. There is a way to do this. I don't want to bog everybody down with shortcut creation today. I kind of wanted to speak to GPost more primarily. So just, my email, my contact, my stuff's on the screen. All who follow up to me and ask for stuff like that will get it. Okay. Can I do an example of turret 1? Well, probably not. I mean, if an example of turret 1 is the stuff of getting into a mill turn machine in FIL and then writing subsequent FIL code to handle the outputs of turret 1. Turret 1 is a word that you subsequently act on in your post, just like these other things. There is if I fold this up again, I do have a turret word inside of this post example, but it's basically doing nothing. The turret example that we have here is saying anything on turret, just output that as is for this condition. If we started speaking to turret 1, turret 2, etc., now we're talking about making those switches inside of GPost based on the output. The problem with turret/1 versus turret/2 is it's just not that easy at the end of the day. You need to be tying that off to the head statement, most likely, from PTC. So there's a connection to the head statement, in many cases, in mill turn from PTC to work in the context and or with turret statements. So I apologize that that concept exceeds what I can, turret head information statements and things to that effect that we could, produce in the context of a webinar like this. That's getting into the stuff that we cover in a GPost class. How can I get the head number? When you are doing reading of the FIL, see, you also have head is a word, okay? If I could scroll up, see, here's head. Okay, so when a sim file head word is presented by the NCL, this code processes. When we want to say, how do I get the head number? Subsequently, getting the head number from GPost is not all that tough because you're going to simply go to your documentation and you're going to go to the FIL manual. And at the top of your FIL manual, well, I'm trying to get this up if I can find it quickly here. They talk about word structure. So this first information here is indicative of helping you learn how to read the number that's coming out associated with the head statement. Most typically, just as an example, and this would be applicable to the head statement as well. We'll pull this from my LITool example in this case, but most typically, reading that word is going to look like this. So inside of SimFile on head, you're going to have a line that looks a lot like what I have right now, and that's going to produce the head number that is being pushed out by the NCL. Val, in this case, this thing that is val would end up equaling the head number if this line existed inside of SimFile on head. How I knew how to write that line comes from that FIL document I just shared. Okay? FIL seems to be based off of computer programming language. Which language would be best to learn in order to understand the rules and laws associated with code from this? You're going to have a hard time with that because this stuff is kind of like Fortran, as close as it is to anything. Fortran is not a language of anything but science nowadays. Fortran is immensely super speedy. It's very durable. It is very good. I mean, there are a number of people that will refer to it as the language of science. It's behind a lot of really heavy scientific calculation stuff to this day. It's not something you're going to want to go learn as a language. I mean, it's not as friendly as Visual Basic. It's not as friendly as stuff. I would just encourage somebody that was looking at learning an aggregate language to help you in FIL. That just makes it that makes a bigger lift. If your duty is to know FIL and you don't have a benefit from learning another language, my encouragement is to go find that FIL document I just showed right here, the FIL manual present in your load point, and go start reading. That's going to get you to the place probably the closest at the end of the day. And whether or not learning another language could be a huge benefit, I don't know that we want to get down in the weeds there, and it would be hard to go learn something close to GPost. It is very unique, and that is very good in that context that we get these manuals and these documents because it is so unique. Can you show how to open the G code after posting the file Sure. After posting the file in terms of opening the code, so we'll go ahead and we'll post this out here again. So I'm going to say post a file. It's going into my blah, blah, blah start directory today. See, whenever you say post a file over here, if you're not doing it with on like a map key like Sean does or something, when you say post a file, you're looking at the path where it's going to end up right up here at the top. Okay. Now, when you output that, one of the things is, let's say you're outputting old FANUC, and that can be frustrating. And if that's where this question came from, it's tough to you can force Creo to open those files automatically, but you can't get around the problem of Windows not knowing how to open something without a file extension. So, but either way, we're going to go ahead and post this NCL. We go ahead and say open. We say done. Okay, here comes my list of posts. I'm going to go grab this post number 7. Now, we see here that when I pick a post from this list, if you look at my screen in the lower left-hand corner, you see the name of that post down there. So this is getting posted to a DMG mono T6 blah, blah, blah. So here comes the output. Okay, so it just output that. But how do I open that? Well, that's in that file. So I would subsequently go to my C6 start directory. I'm going to just roll this up by date here and come to the top, and there is the file that it output, op010.i. I can just right click on that and say open with Notepad, open with whatever. Old FANUC code that is set to output without a file extension, kind of like this. So it just, the program name you output is just clean. There is no dot, extension, anything to be compatible with a lot of old FANUC controls. I got no way to get around that other than using Notepad++ like I do. If I double click on that file to open it with Windows, Windows doesn't have a clue on what to do with it, and it's going to come up and start presenting me with this open with stuff so that, it can figure out or be explicitly told how to open this file. Okay? There's no easy way around that concept at the end of the day. All right? So that's how you can go access and open the posted file. You can also have your post-processor go ahead and open it for you and put it on the screen as a part of post-processing like I've shown. So, those things are possible. It doesn't work that way necessarily out of the gate. Please show link to where PTC posts are located. I've got to go dig it out of the knowledge base. I've literally, to give you that link, I have to go search the knowledge base. I have to go find the current link. I have to copy that and then paste it, which is why I'm saying send me an email. My contact information is on the screen right now. If you send me an email, I'll follow back up with that link that'll take you right to that post-processor list. But I don't have it like copy-pasted onto my computer. I copy and pasted a saved web page on my computer. So when I have to teach in a secure facility, I don't have to, how do I want to say it, I don't have to have internet access to share that. So what I pulled up and shared with respect to that list was my saved image of it, which is why I'm saying please bear with me. Follow up with an email. I'll go get the link and send you the link back. But that's not what I have saved on my own machine, because then I can't bring up that list in a secure site. All right. So that's kind of going on there. Is rotation direction for AB rotary tables designated in GPost? Yes and no. Okay. It can be to some degree. The option file generator does afford for the ability to, let me see if I'll get the option file generator back on the screen here real quick. The option file generator does afford for the ability to have some bias about how rotary stuff works. So bear with me. I've got to open up something that is a rotary so I can speak to this. That's going to be a yes, that's got a rotary on it. So when we start talking about primary AB rotary stuff, usually AB configurations are table-table as opposed to head-table scenarios. That's not explicit, but it is typical. When we start talking about how these things go, default direction clockwise, now you're saying I want all of it to come out in a clockwise way. those types of things can be done. You know, some people always want positive numbers, how you're going to resolve A, different things like that. That's set on your type specs and accesses page inside of the option file generator for having that kind of information and control over how A and B and that type of stuff is being output. The other implication that exists there is in Creo, if this were 5-axis and I were working on this side of the block and the next cut, I told it to come over here and work on this side of the block, 180-degree of pose. You don't really give the post any information about how to get there, and sometimes that causes problems because 180 degrees on a table trunnion and a table face rotary is 180 degrees mathematically in both conditions. But in the real world, how you get there is very different. Whether you're tipping it over and spinning it around or you're just spinning the faceplate or whatever to get to that location. When those things happen, what we encourage is people programming an intermediate cycle that points the tool. It doesn't have to cut anything. You're just telling it. You go into tool motions, and at the end, if I was to edit this thing or if I was to change this real quick, so we'll go to sequence setup. This is kind of a very oldly created file, so we don't really have tool motions now as far as that deal goes for this sequence. So I'm just going to quit that out and give you an example of it being on a new sequence. But on a new sequence, we would subsequently be coming in here and saying, hey, I want to go to tool motions and I want to insert a go-to point that cranks the rotary to this angle, but it's just a go-to point. And that's all I do. And that influences what the post will do from the Creo side. And it assures it consistently because the post is always going to solve for shortest rotation by default. The problems come up when the rotations across A and B are the same 180 degrees. So that's where you need to start thinking about how you're handling it on the Creo side, not necessarily fighting it with GPost. GPost wants to solve the shortest rotation, most productive condition. Send me to an intermediate place so that the solution will be the closer rotation that you want. That's the kind of way that we encourage these things to be done and assure that they're done consistently, irrespective of post-processor theory, if you will. It's not the only way to handle that, but when we start talking about is the rotation for A or B table designated in GPost, that's a big question. I hope I spoke to enough of it to give some people some context there as far as that deal goes. Can I get the sequence name in the FIL file? Absolutely. The way that works is, in theory, you're going to be using the pprint information from Creo. So you have a pprint table here, okay? So you're going to go set your pprint table, and I'll just say to modify it today. And when you do that, one of the many things on that list is the sequence name. It's actually right here. NC sequence name and NC sequence coordinate system names can be output to the NCL file. If you are outputting that to the NCL file, you can do whatever you want with it inside of FIL, because FIL is going to see it just like another record in the NCL file. So yes, you can absolutely get that information, and as you saw on that list, a whole ton of other stuff too, by all means. Okay. How do we retrieve a recording of this for those at our company who could not attend? I don't know if you can record these or not. You will see this up on the Boundary Systems YouTube channel at some point in the not too distant future. I can't speak to the intermission between our presentation and marketing's deployment of that. It's not in my wheelhouse, okay? It could take hours, it could take a couple days, I don't know. But I do know in what I would expect to be the not immensely distant future, this material as presented today in its entirety will be up as a YouTube video on our Boundary Systems YouTube channel. as far as that goes. I don't believe they provide or they allow for the providing of that recording outside of that in like a prepackaged way. I think they kind of, provide it through the YouTube channel, and that's how it's intended. I don't know if you had the ability to record the session on your side or not, because I don't see the participant GoToMeeting interface from my side. So I don't know if those controls were present for you to be able to record or not, because I don't see that interface. I am sorry for that. Okay, that is the list of questions that has been presented up till this time. We still have, more than a dozen attendees in session, so I'm going to pester all of them for a last call here, if you will, and to get any more questions in that you might want to speak to here before we have to wrap up. I've kind of run, the greater share of a half hour over here. I appreciate immensely everybody's continued participation up to this time and your understanding to give me that time to share the questions and answers, if you will. Again, I'm terribly thankful for all the time of all the participants today for us in this webinar. And again, we're kind of getting to a place where I got to wrap up here at 1 o'clock. But by all means, this is kind of last call. If we got questions, get them in there, and I'll speak to them here quick if I can. Can we set the program number O and number for Haas? Yeah, so that's kind of the stuff of when we spoke to GPost. If you jump in here into your option file generator and you go to the start and the end of the program for the post that you're working on, and you come down here and you say program number. You check the box here that says program number. You're going to get a tab up here on the top that says program number. And when you go over there, you can say prompt for the program number. Is it going to be alphanumeric? Is it going to be numeric? What's your prefix? In the case of this question, you're going to put your O in there, your postfix. If you're going to put anything after that, your default string is usually 001 for 4-digit, 5-digit, whatever, and you are asking the person this, enter the prompt for program number, if you will, okay? So that's the stuff of managing the program number, if you will, as part of the context. Okay, so questions, more questions. Real quickly, I'm going to modify my slide here. We were blessed by one of our participants took the time that I didn't have in the context of this presentation to subsequently go find the link for the post stuff on PTC's website. So I'm going to go ahead and post that up here now. I'm going to get it cleared up so everybody can see it well enough here, hopefully. I got to shrink and move some stuff around on the screen, but I'm going to get this up here, and hopefully you folks can grab a screenshot as necessary of it. It's kind of a weird looking link there, but hopefully we can grab a screenshot of that for those that are interested. And my enormous thanks to our participant that went ahead and dug that up off of the web for me, as I didn't have time to go digging around for that stuff right now at the moment. So again, many thanks to you for doing that, and on behalf of not only myself but the other participants that might be benefiting from getting that information right now. So again, we're kind of rolling right on here. I probably got time for one or two more. If I can get a couple of, or any, or all of the participants to throw a question at me. Absent the questions kind of rolling in here, we'll go ahead and kind of work into a wrap up here, as I mentioned. My contact information, all the stuff to follow up is all there. Don't hesitate to follow up to me if that link doesn't show well enough that you can type it in and you need that link information or something. It's a non-issue. Follow up to me. I'll get it to you. As far as additional information related to GPost, information on classes, all that kind of stuff, basic Q&A is very welcomed. We do kind of typically draw lines right around the point of code samples and things to that effect, but we do work hard to help people make their own code and get these things working in the way that their machine and their operation otherwise needs and dictates in their house. Okay. All right. question, can I show how to generate G81 ZRF? Okay. Some of that is, again, we're getting into specific examples, and that gets really tough in the context of a webinar. And I'll be very candid. No, I can't show the full depth of that in the remainder of time that we have today. But what I can get you is headed in the right direction. In order to output a G81 at all, the post is going to have to be set for cycle drill to be G81 here under your prep codes as far as that deal goes. ZRF, okay, those components of the drill cycle come from the NCL code. So if we go look at the NCL code here inside of Creo, so I'm opening up play path, okay, so here we see that we have a cycle, drill, depth, okay, depth is what gets transposed into the Z word for the cycle, okay, millimeters per minute, clearance, etc. What that connects to are the words over here on your MCD file page inside of GPost. Cycle rapid stop is the R word inside of the example line question. That's going to get connected with that NCL value for clear by GPost. GPost understands on the word clear, we make this connection to R, and I put this 3 behind the R. That's how you would get to that. It's going to make the same connection between the feed rate address, that would be the 120 that's shown here, and the F word that is shown in this table here for feed rate, and subsequently the Z word for the Z-axis absolute position as it relates to the G81 line. So that's kind of how we get to the context of how does GPost get to outputting a G81 with a Z, an R, and an F on it. Okay, so those moving parts are all there. If that line doesn't look the way you want, or let's say you need it to be ZRF and you want it to be in that order. Well, in this case, we see that R happens before Z and then F. So what you would do here is select this R and then say move selected address and move it down. And then say exit move. So now a G81 line would come out with G81, the Z value, then the R value, then the feed rate. Because you're not only making the connection to these words here on this page, you are subsequently defining their order as it's designated here on the left-hand side. Okay? All right, good stuff. Very good questions. My apologies for lacking the ability to get down right into the weeds and dig in here and type in code. That would have been one of the most boringest webinars ever created in the history of Earth, and we just really want to kind of give people the overall impression of GPost here, as opposed to making this a lesson in writing FIL. We do offer that as a class, by all means, and when people have specific questions related to writing FIL, we are here to answer those questions and help them with that, by all means. Okay? So I apologize for those that I may not have been able to provide exactly the context of the answer that you might have been seeking. There are some limits in the ways that I can share as both a presenter and a PTC partner, if you will. So with that, I probably got to call it. We went for another 5 minutes here. I haven't had any more questions come in here in the last couple of minutes as far as that deal goes. I'm going to put my contact information back up again here with that link for getting to the free stuff as far as that deal goes, as far as what free post-processor information exists. I do know it exists for both mill and there's some wire EDM stuff out there and some lathe too. We typically just write a post as necessary for what is necessary. I don't typically, go get something from the PTC library myself. So, while I can show what's there on the list, I can't speak to its quality, its level of completion, current state, any of that. And I do know the last I knew, PTC does not directly support those posts. They are available. You can go download them. You can use it as a starting point, but they don't know anything about it if you call support and start questioning what's going on with that post. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time immensely. I hope there was good benefit and information here today regarding the GPost system we use for Creo NC in the PTC ecospace. Everybody has my contact information there, as well as that of our sales team, our YouTube channel, where to go get the free post list, and by all means, don't hesitate to follow up with myself if there are questions or additional stuff I can speak to and things to that effect. Again, I thank everybody immensely for their time and participation today, and I hope everybody benefited from our GPost webinar this afternoon. I wish everybody a great day, and until our next webinar, everybody please take care.